Hi everyone, welcome to episode 102 of the Catholics Against Militarism podcast. My name is Ellen, and in this episode I'm going to play for you one of the most incredible talks I've ever heard Father McCarthy give. He tells an amazing story about a time in the early 80s when he and George Zabelka and Charles Sweeney went out to lunch. In case you don't know who George Zabelka is, I highly recommend you listen to episode 50 of the Catholics Against Militarism podcast before you listen to this one. It tells the whole story of George Zabelka. He was a Catholic priest who was actually the chaplain for the atomic bomb crews on Tinian Island in 1945. So he met the men and was their priest and pastor, the same men who dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Charles Sweeney was the man who flew the plane that dropped the bomb on Nagasaki. So in the early 80s, by that point, George Zabelka had pretty much converted to gospel nonviolence, and Charles Sweeney was never, to his dying day, regretful of what he did during the war. He always felt that it was just and right. And so Father McCarthy tells this story about going out to lunch at a Howard Johnson's in the early 80s and these three men sitting down and having a conversation. It's really pretty incredible. So please go listen to episode 50 if you haven't heard that yet. Listen to that before you listen to this one. I also wanted to remind you that if you want to join Father McCarthy and I for the pre-Advent retreat in November, we're going to be meeting online for 4 Tuesdays in November, listening to Father McCarthy's Behold the Lamb retreat. Everyone's doing that on their own. And then we'll meet up every Tuesday night to talk about it. Father McCarthy will be with us on the first Tuesday of the month and on the last Tuesday of the month for a Q&A, and you will be with me and all the other participants for the second and third Tuesdays. You can pay up to $100 for the retreat if you'd like to support the podcast. You can also pay nothing, and we would love to have you either way. So check that out. There's a link in the description, and I'll go ahead and get to the talk now, and I really hope you enjoy this one as much as I do. All right, God bless.
Today, we are again at Trinity Site, virtually or in person, for the annual prayer vigil here on July 16th. In order to pray for the victims and the executioners of the atomic bomb, the creators of the atomic murder machine, and not to condemn as much as to recognize that what they did is embedded in the mass and immense history of iniquity in the human situation. There is a movie that has made hundreds of millions of dollars in the last few years on Robert Oppenheimer, who's called the father of the atomic bomb. Well, that's a bit of a misnomer. By a bit, I mean it's wrong. The father of the atomic bomb is Satan. No one else, Satan. It is the evil one who put into the mind of human beings the desire to make an instrument that would destroy another human being, and in this case, destroy other human beings on a massive scale. It's the same entity, the same power, evil, Satan, that put into the mind of Cain to kill Abel in order to get what Cain wanted. We often look at the atomic bomb and its creation and first detonation today on July 16th in 1945 because of the quantity of murder that one bomb can release on the human situation. But as General Curtis LeMay has said over and over again, with a little bit of braggadocio, he killed more human beings in one night in his firebombing of Tokyo than both Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs killed. So the quantity is not the issue, ultimately. No more is it the issue behind the fact that Cain only killed one person in the beginning. The issue is that human willingness to submit to the evil one, to become servants of the evil one, the killjoy in human existence, the diabolical, that is a murderer from the beginning and a deceiver. 79 years ago today, the first atomic detonation occurred ever in the world, July 16, 1945. And so we come here to pray continually for the last 35 years, because what is obvious is that from 1945, July 16th, to today, 2024, on July 16th, everything has gotten worse. The number of atomic weapons in the world, nuclear weapons in the world, is literally astronomical. We don't know. It's astronomical in terms of the ability to destroy human beings. In fact, to destroy the whole human race. We don't know really which countries have weapons of nuclear proportion or how many they have. What we do know is that it's now at the point where we're talking about revolutionaries, countries have the ability to literally wipe out millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions in one instance with one bomb or more. And this is the key point, and that the same diabolical force that said to Cain, induced Cain, motivated Cain, deceived Cain into killing Abel, and that put in the minds of human beings to construct an atomic bomb, or put in the minds of others to firebomb Tokyo, etc., etc., etc. The father of lies, who is the father of the atomic bomb, and he is the father of the destruction of Tokyo and Dresden and Cologne, etc., etc., etc. He is the one that has to be stopped from putting into the minds of human beings not only that this is what they can do, but this is what they should do under certain circumstances. Indeed, this is really even of God. We know, for the most part, the details of the explosion here of the first atomic bomb in 1945. We know today is the 79th anniversary. But today is also the 20th anniversary of something, an event, that is related to July 16th, 1945, and that I think deserves some attention. many years ago, I think it was in the early 1980s, George Zabelka, who was the chaplain of the Hiroshima-Nagasaki bomb crews in June, July, and August of 1945, the Catholic chaplain, was visiting me in my home in Brockton, Massachusetts. While he was there, some article appeared in a Boston Globe or some newspaper that was there, and it was the commander of the Nagasaki plane, Major General Charles W. Sweeney. And he wrote a rather positive evaluation, good evaluation on dropping the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In other words, he wrote a pro-atomic bomb piece. And so George thought to himself, I'm going to call him up. Now, he hadn't talked to Sweeney in decades, but he did call him up because Charlie Sweeney, lived in Milton, Massachusetts, not too far away. And they talked on the phone, and then they made arrangements for getting together physically. And so, a day or two later, I took George to where the agreement was to meet Charlie Sweeney, and it was at a Howard Johnson's on Route 128, just south of Route 2. And so we get there, and after we got there, we were early, and we sat down, and we had tea and coffee and so forth and so on. And George was wondering, as he was sitting there at the table, he was wondering if he'd recognized Charlie Sweeney after all these years. And so that was kind of a concern. How would we know him? Well, the minute he walked in the door, we knew that's Charlie Sweeney. And it's a most strange thing that when I actually physically met Charlie Sweeney in the early 1980s at Howard Johnson's, I not only liked the guy, what I saw in him was me. He was no different than I was. Now, I don't mean spiritually in the sense of, yes, we are both Catholic. I mean in terms of his mannerisms, in terms of the way he acted, in terms of how he had a big cigar in his mouth, and in terms of a nice person that he was, and trying to be a nice person anyway. In other words, Charlie Sweeney and I were nurtured. We were brought up in exactly the same world. Pre-Vatican II, Tridentine, Constantinian Catholicism as it was taught to Boston Irish Catholics by the church. Everything, as we talked, that Charlie went through as a kid, and he lived like I did, a moderate, middle-class life for that time. And the things that he enjoyed, and the going to Mass, and the on and on, the catechism and everything, it was the same. It was the same. What he was told and what he learned from the nuns and the priests and so forth, no different than what I learned, and the feeling was the same. In fact, I'd go so far to say, loosely, that Charlie Sweeney was a psychological doppelganger of me, or I was of him. I sat there and I was and I was stunned at the fact that I never met this man before. For a couple of decades, I've been talking about him as the person who killed 40,000 or more people in Nagasaki, as the pilot of the boxcar, the plane that dropped the bombs on Nagasaki. And always in my presentations, there was a sense of not liking the person. But now that I met him, he was like me. In fact, I've said to people, I could have been him. He could have been me. You know, when he graduated from North Quincy High School, within the year, he was so nurtured that he went into the Army Air Force to fly planes. This was before the war began with the United States. When I graduated from high school and later from college, I signed up to fly planes in the Marine Corps. Now, he went through with his plan, and for a lot of extraneous reasons, my plan didn't work out. But when we graduated from high school, it was the same consciousness out of the same Boston Irish Catholic, Constantinian, Tridentine, pre-Vatican II Catholicism. It was the same consciousness that was nurtured by the state when he was a young man and when I was a young man 20 years later. Even I thought it was funny, even the cigar, because for 20 years I smoked a cigar before I stopped, of course, and because of concerns about cancer. But he had the cigar, and there he was, and with the cigar, talking and smoking, and at the table of Howard Johnson's. Now, the conversation at that table was very, very civil. Nice conversation, which does not mean that George Zabelka didn't raise, in the way that he would do, the whole problem of the dropping of the atomic bomb and being a follower of Jesus. He was specific. He talked about it. He talked about his own conversion from violence to nonviolence. He asked Charlie Sweeney directly what he thought of it. And what Charlie Sweeney said at that time was, he thought it was right. He thought he had done the right thing. He thought the country had done the right thing. And that he'd do it again. No ifs, ands, or buts. He was absolutely clear on that. And George, of course, went back and forth with him. And it didn't change anything, but it was a civil conversation. And I listened to him, give his reasons, which were very, very reasonable as to why he dropped the bomb on Japan. And he talked about Bataan and Nanking and all the other atrocities. And he talked about the death toll at Okinawa and what invasion of Japan would mean in terms of destruction of people, Japanese and American and so forth and so on. And that he just thought that this is the way to win the war. There was no bravado in his voice. There was no sadness in his voice. There was just a sense that this is the way it is. He was in war. He did his duty. And that's what he was supposed to do. There was no sense of sin. As a matter of fact, he mentioned that a night or two before he dropped the bomb, he went to see a Catholic chaplain in another squadron on Tinian Island. And the chaplain told him, when he kind of expressed some concern and worry about the numbers of people that were going to be killed by his dropping the atomic bomb on Kokora, which was the target at that time. And the chaplain just told him, that's the way modern war is fought. You didn't decide it, I didn't decide it, but that's the way the modern war is fought, with mass extermination of people. And you're fighting a modern war. You're not fighting back in the days of the Knights or something like that. Well, anyway, Charlie did it at least at the time that I was listening to him in Howard Johnson's on that day in the early 80s. He was absolutely convinced. And I've read his book, which was written 10, 12 years later, and that's 1995, and he was still absolutely convinced that he did the right thing in dropping the bomb, and there was nothing to confess in terms of dropping the bomb. Well, anyway, that's an introduction to something that is important here, or at least I think is important in terms of July 16th. July 16th, the anniversary of the first detonation of an atomic bomb, was not the detonation of a uranium atomic bomb. A uranium atomic bomb was what was dropped on Hiroshima. There was no need to test the uranium atomic bomb. The scientists were absolutely positive that they had it right, that everything was in order, it would work. The test at Trinity Site on July 16, 1945, was of a plutonium bomb. Plutonium is probably the most deadly element in the universe in terms of human beings. A speck of it can destroy people. But anyway, it was the plutonium bomb that they were not sure would really explode right, or that they had it right in terms of theory. And so July 16, 1945, was the explosion of a plutonium bomb here at Trinity Site. Now, there is a sense where there was no need for that, because they knew what they had in the atomic bomb that dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They didn't need the plutonium bomb, but they went ahead and tested it. And then, of course, on August 9th, 1945, it was a plutonium bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. It was a plutonium bomb that Charlie Sweeney and his crew dropped on Nagasaki. And so, in that sense, it was also an experiment, as was Trinity Site on July 16, 1945, because they weren't sure what was going to happen. And, of course, what did happen was a massive destruction of human beings. But that distinction was not thought about, and that distinction remains almost lost to history, because the two dates, August 6 and August 9, 1945, as well as July 16, 1945, are subsumed just under the name of the detonation of atomic bombs. Now, here's the interesting thing. It's been a concern, I'd say, a concern of an interest of mine. I don't want to overstate it. I don't want to say it's a terribly pressing thing, but I've thought about it at least for 20 years. In 2004, I read in the newspaper that Charlie Sweeney had died at Massachusetts General Hospital, and that he had died on July 16th, 2004, the day of the explosion of the first plutonium bomb in the history of the world, a bomb that he, on August 9th, dropped on Nagasaki. And I thought that's kind of strange. He dies on the anniversary of the first detonation of the bomb that he dropped. That was the first detonation that killed people by massive numbers. Now, what was clear was, in my mind, was that in many ways, this man, Charlie Sweeney, was trapped, as I was trapped when I got out of high school and college, in a nurtured, we'll call it brainwashed, reality by two institutions, the institutional church and the institutional state. And that reality can, I guess, be summed up in the general terms religious nationalism. But it wasn't anything that was unique to Charlie Sweeney or I. Every average, normal Irish Catholic kid, run-of-the-mill Catholic kid who existed pre-Vatican II, this is how, whether they went to public school or Catholic school, this is what they were nurtured in: religious nationalism or Christian nationalism. Now, I just talking to Charlie Sweeney for those 2 hours on that one afternoon in Howard Johnson's on Route 128 outside Boston, I knew this guy. I knew him as well as I knew myself. I mean, I didn't know the details about, he really did have a genius at flying planes. I didn't know he was certified to fly every single plane the military ever produced during the Second World War. I didn't know that he had flown planes before Nagasaki in awfully difficult situations, not necessarily combat situations, and that he went from joining the Army Air Corps, as it was called then, at 20 years old, 19 to 20 years old, to being a major in the Army at 25. When he dropped the bomb on Nagasaki, he was a major. But he was only a 25-year-old. But he had a genius for flying planes. And that was everything. He had status. He had professional applause. He had what he liked to do and liked to learn about. He had it all. And it didn't in any way, shape, or form conflict with anything Jesus ever said and did from his birth to his death on Calvary. There was no contradiction in Charlie Sweeney's mind, as there was no contradiction in my mind when I got through high school or I got through college. It just never entered my mind, as it never entered his, that this is not something he should be doing. And yet, I'm going to say that I know Charlie Sweeney because Charlie Sweeney was a psychological doppelganger of me. Even the way he talked and laughed and so forth. The way he looked in many ways. Now, I'm going to say that I know Charlie Sweeney. And I know that if he met Madurai Nagai coming out of Mass at St. Mark's Catholic Church in Dorchester, or if he met her in the grocery store while she was shopping, he would have been most respectful, most kind, most courteous. He would do absolutely everything to be nice to her, to help her, or, to just be a good person in a relationship with her. Whether he just passed her by for a moment or he knew her a little better than that as a neighbor. But on August 9, 1945, Charlie Sweeney killed her, slayed her, destroyed her, murdered her. Madurai Nagai was a young mother living in Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. What allowed Charlie Sweeney? What transformed Charlie Sweeney? What interfered with his thinking? And he had a good mind. What interfered with his thinking that allowed him to think that Madurai Nagai, who was a Catholic woman, young Catholic woman with children, who he would have been gracious to in the extreme, as a human being living in Boston, what allowed him to think he could slay her? There's only one answer to that. And I can guarantee you this is the answer. Charlie Sweeney was not born with the desire to kill Madurai Nagai. He was not born to do that. He was not born with any value system that said this, you can do this. In fact, he was baptized into Christ, a Christian, who taught just the opposite of that. However, Charlie Sweeney, like myself, drunk of the same diabolical concoctions from exactly the same 2 cups as I did. Trinitine Irish Catholic Catholicism, Constantinian Catholicism, and the Irish Catholic form in Boston, just as I drank from that. And I imbibed in that. We both drank from the cups from 2 institutional cups. By drank, I mean we took into our minds, absorbed in our hearts, absorbed in our being, religious nationalism, Christian nationalism, through the institutions of the state, nurturing us in schools, and through the institution of the church, nurturing us in catechism, that when your country calls you to kill, you kill. No, Charlie was not born with any desire to murder Madurai Nagai. And of course, if he met her personally on the streets of Boston or Quincy, he never would have done such a thing. But he did exterminate her. And I literally mean exterminate, evaporate her with the plutonium bomb on August 9, 1945. because of how he was nurtured through the twin institutions of institutional Catholicism and the institutional state. Nurtured may be the wrong word. Maybe I should use the word brainwashed. As all children my age and his age, who fell under the tutelage of being ardent Catholics, necessarily became, by their very nurturing, religious nationalists ready to kill for God and country. Pro Deo et Patria was on just about every school building that I ever attended, in college or in high school. So Charlie, like myself, when I was coming out of high school or college, Charlie did not have any sense whatsoever that dropping an atomic bomb, a plutonium bomb, on top of Madurai Nagai, a fellow Catholic, a fellow churchgoer, a fellow mass-goer, a fellow believer in Christ, baptized into Christ in the Catholic Church as he was, dropping that bomb on her so that nothing of her remained after the explosion except a few charred bones and her melted rosary. Now, I know that this is considered, far out. This is considered just too much to take in. This is considered, what are you doing looking back at minutia in this massive destructive war and looking at, what happened to one or two people in it? Charlie Sweeney and Madurai Nagai. So, I suppose you could think that this homily is meant to be a lesson on a few little unknown facts that by the standards of the world are unimportant in terms of World War II. Or perhaps it is a reflection, you may think, to cue in a kind of empathy for all parties concerned and for intensifying the ongoing hand-wringing over the daily chronic horror of the phenomenal war that surrounds us. I suppose it could be both of those. But that is not my intention. My intention is, in this homily, my primary purpose of this homily is nothing less than on this 79th anniversary of the detonation of the first atomic bomb, a plutonium bomb, at Trinity Site, and the 20th anniversary to the day of Charlie Sweeney's death, to use this as an opportunity for people to reflect, and not only to reflect, but for Catholics to come to grips with the fact, and by Catholics I mean the Pope, the cardinals, the bishops in particular, and priests, It's come to the fact that the time has more than come. And listen to these words carefully. The time has more than come to terminate forever the Catholic Church's just war theory experiment as a legitimate pastoral practice, and to declare unequivocally, ex cathedra, and infallibly that the power elites of this world, who manufacture wars and profit handsomely from wars, will forever forward have to conduct their diabolical and murderous chess games without an ounce of Catholic participation. Parenthetically, I would also hope that every other Christian church, from the local house church to Canterbury and Constantinople, would follow. And I would say that the basis for such a dogmatic declaration by the largest church in the world, over 1.5 billion baptized immortal souls in the Catholic Church, would be, first, the entire murderous history, destructive history, inept history, impotent history of the just war theory of the Catholic Church since it was introduced in the 4th century. And the second basis, and most important of all, would be only such a declaration would be consistent with the divine and infallible authority of Jesus Christ in the Gospels. That's it. There may be some, or there may be great suffering that comes with refusing governments the participation of the Catholic population in their wars, in their murders under the name of war, in their mass slaughters of people who are so-called enemies. Or, as has been the case in many countries in the past, including the United States, death may even be the consequence of saying, I will not serve Mars or Mammon in war. But the good news, right from Golgotha, is that undeserved suffering, responded to with Christ-like love, is redemptive of one and all, even the enemy. So let us pray today for Madura Nagai, for Charlie Sweeney, and for all those who have been destroyed by the father of lies, by the father of the atomic bomb, by the father of the plutonium bomb, Satan, and those who have fallen under his domain and acted in his service. Let us pray that the Catholic Church, all churches, do what they're supposed to do and say what they're supposed to say. And that is absolute, unequivocal, infallible, ex cathedra statement. War never again. For Catholics or for Christians. Anything short of that is simply going to result in more Nagasaki's and more Charlie Sweeney's being nurtured and nationalistic religious Catholicism and dropping bombs on Madurai Nagais, fellow Catholics, fellow Christians, fellow members of the body of Christ, fellow immortal souls, infinitely loved forever by the Father of all. Wake up, bishops, popes, cardinals, priests. Speak the truth. Say absolute no to Catholic participation in war. No, because it contradicts the teaching regarding the will of God as revealed by Jesus. Amen.